All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We've had a few minutes to catch up before we open it up live to everybody. But thank you so much for being with us. A few housekeeping notes. We are recording today's presentation, and we will make a copy of today's recording available to all of our guests. And we want to keep this super casual, so please feel free to ask us any questions at all during today's webinar. To ask a question, use the Q&A box. If you look at the right side of your screen, you can type a question at any time, and we will attempt to answer just as many questions as we can. So we welcome your input and your questions and feedback. And again, we want to keep this very, very conversational. I'm Stephanie Few from Womble Dickinson, and we're just delighted to have this time with you this morning. We have several of our wonderful partners and colleagues on the webinar today, and I'll introduce each of them in just a moment. But we're so grateful to be able to have this time with SC Bio. And I am SC Bio's biggest fan, and also have had the great pleasure and fortune of working with its president, Sam Konduras. So at this time, I will turn it over to Sam to say a few words to start us off.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and I'm very honored to join this morning. We're proud to be kind of a co-sponsor of this event. Womble Dickinson is an extraordinary law firm. They're one of the, frankly, top 5 investors of South Carolina Bio, so they've been a huge part of our mission to build, advance, innovate, and grow this industry, which has a surprisingly compelling story in the state of South Carolina. 680 life science firms in almost every county in the state, accounting for what is now, we believe, almost a $14 billion annual impact for the Palmetto State. So we're grateful to be partners with Womble Dickinson. Stephanie served as our vice chairman of our board during really what was a reinvention time for our organization over the last 3.5 years, and I don't think we could have done it without her. There's never been a greater ambassador. Her positive energy and exuberance and knowledge. She is a great economic development expert for those beyond the FDA navigation process who would have other needs, because their firm handles just about everything. And then Alyssa Fleming is also on right now, and I want to thank Alyssa. Our board members rotate every 3 years, and Alyssa is the newest board member representing Womble Dickinson and she has got fantastic healthcare experience and is a clinician to boot, which says a lot about the team that you're about to hear from. I'm really grateful this is being recorded, because I know it's going to be in our archives and something that a lot of people are going to tap into. You're going to hear more from each of the speakers that Stephanie will talk about: Heather Hatcher, Sarah Tucker, Dan Orr, and they again kind of show the breadth and scale of Womble Dickinson as partners in Atlanta, DC, Winston-Salem offices. Each of them brings really complementary and powerful knowledge on FDA navigation. So I'm excited, Stephanie, and Alyssa, that we have several of our SC Bio stakeholders. Some of them are early stage companies and moving into this space and really seeking to learn a lot today. So thank you all so much for putting this on for all of us.
Thank you, Sam. Under Sam's leadership, Bio has had a resurgence in just new energy that is even more important this year than ever before. And I'm so glad that Sam's leadership coincided with this very important year that we're all in. It's just grown significantly, and the passion and energy and smarts and sweat equity that Sam puts into this endeavor, which is building life sciences, just the culture, the brand, the framework for businesses in South Carolina is second to none. So thank you, Sam, for your leadership and your friendship and for all that you do. I'll start introducing our team. So first off, we have Dan Orr, and I'm going to let Dan speak about his practice, but I'll introduce him and brag on him for just a moment before we turn it over to Dan. Dan is a partner in our Washington, D.C. office. He helps clients ranging from startups to Fortune 500 corporations navigate the FDA regulatory requirements and safeguard their intellectual property. Before joining Womble, Dan was regulatory counsel in the FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, where he solved regulatory problems in a portfolio of drugs and biologics with a combined annual sales of over $37 billion. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you to describe your day-to-day practice for everyone.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. My name is Dan Orr. I'm a partner in Washington, D.C. office of Womble Bond. Depending on which study you credit, it takes between 8 and 16 years and somewhere between $750 million and $2.6 billion to bring a new drug or biologic to market from discovery through FDA approval. Most of this cost is in clinical trials and scale-up manufacturing. Now, if you work in medical devices, you're in luck because that cost is on average only about $96 million. But before anybody gets discouraged, if you make it through this very long, very demanding process, this same research shows that an approved product earns its investment back many times over. But if you haven't guessed already, the biggest obstacle facing most early-stage life science companies is access to capital. And this is particularly true outside of Boston and the Bay Area because it's more difficult to find larger companies to partner with. So it's critical for early stage companies to have a plan to chart the most efficient course through the regulatory process. And that's mostly the work that I do with early stage companies, is finding the most efficient regulatory pathway to market, identifying precedents from similar products that tell us what the FDA's expectations are going to be, making sure clients make the most of the resources available to them, and preventing and solving problems with the agency. So on a more concrete level, this means making sure that clients don't do unnecessary studies that aren't going to help them get to market, that they don't overlook opportunities for additional sources of capital and revenue along the way, things like licensing of intellectual property through master files, or tax credits and priority review vouchers for certain rare diseases and indications. Often these types of priority review vouchers they've been sold in the past from one sponsor to another for as much as $350 million. So this same work continues after approval with our larger life science clients as companies grow. These are publicly traded and Fortune 500 ones, except that here we're focused on how do we grow the product after approval, how do we expand the market, add new indications, help more people, and extend the product's life cycle. In short, how do we help clients get the best possible return from the investment they made in obtaining regulatory approval? So one of the things that we've also found very helpful is integrating regulatory and patent advice. According to a number of studies, anywhere between 80 and 95% of a life science company's value is in its intellectual property. So Womble's a top 10 patent firm. I'm a patent attorney as well, and I work a lot with other patent attorneys. And most law firms don't kind of have that opportunity to integrate the regulatory and the intellectual property. So that's an area where we're often able to create a lot of value to make sure that clients make the most out of their data and they get the most assets out of the discoveries and the inventions that they're making as they bring their product to market. So my practice focuses primarily on biologics more than any other type of product. I wrote several of the FDA's regulations concerning biologics, definition of the term biological products, biological products and master files, and I was also a subject matter expert on patents and exclusivity for biological products. So biologics is the area that I can usually create the most value for clients. I work a lot with cell and gene therapies because there's so much growth in that area, and I also do a lot of work with monoclonal antibodies, therapeutic peptides, nucleic acid therapies, as well as some of the complex drugs that tend to be larger than most small molecule drugs, but that aren't quite large enough to qualify as biologics. And I work with other small molecule drugs and with medical devices sometimes as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm so impressed with your practice area. It's so different than what I do on a day-to-day basis, but it's terribly interesting. So thank you for that overview. I'm going to introduce now our partner, Sarah Tucker. Sarah is a partner in the Atlanta office of Womble Bond Dickinson. Sarah is a veteran trial lawyer with more than a decade of experience representing life sciences companies in what we call bet the company litigation in both state and federal courts nationwide. Sarah also counsels companies on FDA regulatory issues and product liability risk mitigation strategies. So I'll turn it over to Sarah to give us a great background and overview of her day-to-day practice.
Thanks, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I really appreciate that introduction, which always makes me sound much better than I actually am. No, but hopefully I don't have a dog or a child busting in, because I'm sure we're all familiar with working at home, and they have all been strictly warned to not come in, but we'll see what happens. My practice, my background is mostly on the litigation side. So I handle lawsuits once, you know, the proverbial shit has hit the fan. So if your product comes out and you have an issue and someone sues you for personal injury, that's when I usually get involved. However, I know a lot of the participants here today are in early stage companies, and you're probably wondering, you know, how can I actually help you, because we don't really have any products liability issues yet, right? Part of my practice is also dedicated to regulatory work on the FDA side. So you'll hear from Dr. Heather Hatcher next, and we work together frequently on regulatory submissions to FDA and building that regulatory strategy with early stage companies to determine which regulatory pathways are the best for you to be pursuing, what's going to hit your objectives the quickest, the fastest, and the easiest for you. As Dan said, this can be a very expensive endeavor. So bringing in people on the front end to really help you navigate that complex process is important. Other things that I do in my practice with my clients, which range anywhere from startup companies in the biotech pharma space to Fortune 500 companies in the pharmaceutical and medical device arena. So I've sort of represented the gamut of different companies in the life sciences space. And what I've done for clients related to product liability who are in earlier stages, or even for really large companies that have new products coming to market frequently, we'll do label reviews for them so that we can make sure that you're in compliance before your product hits the market for FDA regulatory compliance. I can also look at those. A lot of the lawsuits that come in are failure to warn lawsuits. So they're essentially saying that you haven't provided the right warning to the consumer, and in this case, the physician, because they're prescription products. So you haven't provided the right warning, and then someone got hurt. So you want to make really sure that as you're going through the FDA process, you're considering how that warning is going to be read later, and making sure that you're trying to mitigate those risks associated with potential litigation. Other things that I've done for clients sort of on the front end of things would include preparing sales reps. So if you have a medical device or a pharmaceutical product that you plan to sell using sales reps, those are a huge area of liability for life sciences companies. So if that's something that you intend to get into as part of your company's business model, it's definitely worth talking to someone to figure out, you know, what can and can't my sales reps say, and making sure that they are well trained in that area and that you've brought in the right people for those things so that you avoid lawsuits in the future. Preemption usually gets rid of some lawsuits for life sciences companies, and it's a legal doctrine, but it doesn't apply to sales representative liability because those are typically just negligence cases. So it would get outside of our normal motion to dismiss stage for those kinds of claims, and you would be stuck with really fighting a long, drawn-out, expensive lawsuit. So we want to avoid that if we can on the front end for sure, and at least mitigate it. And then another thing I've done for clients that they've found helpful, and this can be ongoing whether you have a new product coming out or something's coming onto the market, is risk assessments. So looking particularly at your product liability risk and the type of product that you have. So for example, if it's a drug that treats high blood pressure, looking at the rest of the high blood pressure medications that are currently on the market that are being regulated, and seeing what's going on in the plaintiff's bar to see, are they targeting these types of medications? Is there already litigation going on? Has case law already come out about that type of product? If it's a brand new medication or it's a brand new medical device, you can still draw analogies. You know, I had a client that was a medical device manufacturer who is making pregnancy medical devices. So they were monitors that could be worn when you are outside the doctor's office. So similar to the belts that they would have, but they were external monitors, and they wanted to, link it up to an app so that the consumer could use it at home. And so there were a lot of regulatory issues on the front end as to how is this device going to be treated? What's the appropriate regulatory pathway for this to go through? And how are we going to mitigate any liability risks that come up? And we were able to go back through the case law and find examples of other pregnancy-related products and then other products that were kind of similar, and see how the courts had treated that, see if there were major jury verdicts, see if there were dangerous jurisdictions, and what we could really do to mitigate those risks. So that's some of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. And I would also point out, because I don't think we have anyone here that's talking about our IP litigation or our corporate partners that we have at the firm. We have a very broad life sciences practice at the firm. We have lawyers that are practicing in almost every legal area that you could imagine, from employment issues that you might be having to IP, protecting your trademarks and your patents. And we also have corporate partners that work on front-end agreements and deals that are going on, so they can help with corporate entity formation if you're at that stage, or they can even help once you get to the stage of distribution agreements and that type of thing. And we have people that have really dug in and are very well familiar with the industry, and sometimes I help work on those contracts as well, depending if they need some help looking at like FDA regulatory issues in those. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, and I'm happy to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. And you touch on a very important point. And just by way of background, for some of our friends who may have joined us this morning who are not as familiar with our law firm, we have around 1,200 lawyers internationally. So we have a tremendous amount of depth in corporate matters, obviously in life science matters, litigation, IP, you name it. The space that I work in is economic development. So I have the great pleasure of working with companies when they are moving into a state. And I always represent the company in negotiating and compiling incentive packages to support our companies. And I am lucky to get to work with those life science companies that are moving into South Carolina and those that are expanding their footprint within South Carolina. So, but our team that you see here today is a wonderful representative example of a tremendous amount of talent and experience and great depth and great passion for serving clients. So thank you, Sarah, for touching on that point. Now I'm going to turn to Heather Hatcher. Dr. Hatcher is a regulatory scientist, and she is based in our Winston-Salem, North Carolina office. She has an extensive and very impressive background as a basic and clinical research scientist, as well as regulatory affairs. This has enabled her to effectively guide clients through the complex FDA regulatory landscape. Before joining Womble, Hatcher worked in academic research and research administration at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center for 12 years. Dr. Hatcher's 20-plus year research career spans a number of fields, including endocrinology, cancer biology, and regenerative medicine. And her research has been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals. So thank you, Dr. Hatcher, for being with us today. And I'll turn it over to you to share with our guests and friends a little bit more about your day-to-day practice.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Sorry for the glitch. I think the cold weather is messing with my Wi-Fi up here in North Carolina, but I'm so happy to be back with my South Carolina bio friends. I am so sad that we couldn't be together for our annual conference. I've been for the last several years, and I've met many of you. So I won't bore you with all the things that I do, but I wanted to share some things that I've come to learn as I've been working with clients in this space over the last few years. So I work very closely with Dan Orr and with Sarah Tucker and some other partners in IP, helping clients navigate the FDA. And as you know, the FDA is a conglomerate of multiple centers. And each center has very unique methods and ways of communicating. And so one of the things that I help clients understand is, what center are you dealing with? And in many cases, you may be dealing with more than one center, and helping clients to be strategic in how they present their information on their product to the agency, to be most impactful, both on where they're going to invest their resources and what the next steps are. And one thing I've observed in a lot of startup companies and even some larger companies that are looking to do a novel product is that you really, as a manufacturer or as a distributor, need to understand your product so that you can explain it not only to us, but to the agency. A lot of times we see clients who have a number of indications for a product, but they maybe don't have the data to support every indication. Most of the time when clients come to us, they want to know, how quickly can I get this done? How much is this going to cost, right? And so one of the important things that we can bring to you is helping you understand how to make the most of your interactions with FDA so that you're not wasting time and money, so that you can more quickly get your product to market. We understand everyone is pressed for time. You've spent years and years developing your product. You're ready to start making some revenue off of your product, and you have some crazy regulatory lady telling you, whoa, it's going to be 3 months before I can even get FaceTime with the FDA. What's going on here? So tempering expectations is a lot of what I do. I know that doesn't sound very glamorous, but it is what we do. The nuts and bolts of what I do, we have specific software packages that we use to prepare submissions to the agency, which a lot of startup companies do not have. Either they don't have the infrastructure, personnel, or the know-how to make compliance submissions. So for certain clients, they may have some regulatory in-house, but they don't have the ability to submit communications to the agency in the way that the agency expects to see them. We call this Electronic Common Technical Documents, ECTD. And most of the centers require some sort of an electronic submission now. Several years ago, most academic centers could submit on paper, but Congress has mandated that they want to go paper-free. And as of 2017, most submissions to the agency must be electronic, and they must be in a particular format. So I spend a lot of time preparing compliance submissions. So we're really happy to be here today and to talk to you all about our regulatory practice and how we can help you get your products to market.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather. Now we're going to move on to some questions that I'm going to ask of Sarah and Heather and Dan. I'm going to start with Dan. Dan, how is FDA emergency use authorization different from marketing approval?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's it's a question that's coming up a lot recently because so many products are seeking emergency use authorization instead of marketing approval to treat the COVID-19 pandemic. So emergency use authorization is basically an authorization that exists or a form of approval only during a declared public health emergency. So in this case, the COVID-19 pandemic, once that emergency is declared ended by the Department of Health and Human Services, those products will no longer be able to be marketed. The other big difference between emergency use authorization and marketing approval is the amount of data that's required. So emergency use authorization is generally issued based on fairly small clinical samples of 100 to 200 patients. The equivalent of a phase 2 trial. And whereas full marketing approval typically requires multi-stage phase 3 with several hundred patients an arm, at least for a drug or biologic, or less than that for a medical device. So emergency use authorization is a way to get to market faster, but it's only for a limited time for the duration of the emergency.
Thank you.
Can I jump in there for a second, Stephanie?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I've been working on a lot of emergency use authorization. I know we all have this past year, of course, with the pandemic. And interestingly, there is tort immunity, just so that everyone's aware. So if you do get sued later for a COVID product, you should be immunized from a product liability lawsuit unless there's willful misconduct, meaning it would have to be something pretty egregious. So they'll have some sort of, vaccine compensation fund equivalent. So something for people who have injuries related to COVID countermeasure products, where people can recover, but it's not going to be part of the tort system. So I think that that's important if you're thinking about getting into that market. And we also have been counseling clients that, just like Dan said, if you get an emergency use authorization, it's only going to allow you to market the product for as long as the pandemic is going on. So even if you get that emergency use authorization, it can be prudent for you to go ahead and on the back end, behind the scenes, be pulling together the information that you need for either a 510K submission or the appropriate drug submission, depending on the product. But you want to do that behind the scenes so you can continue to market the product once the pandemic ends.
Thank you, Sarah. And to build on that theme, Sarah, can you speak to, is there a fast track process at the FDA for COVID-related products?
So there are several fast track type processes at FDA. They've got different names, which are all a little bit confusing, but there's a priority review process, and that basically means that they're going to look at something within a 6-month window. There's also a breakthrough therapy designation. This is for all products too, not just for COVID-related products. The COVID side of things, you would submit an emergency use authorization, so that should sort of fast track your product for you, but you can also, in addition to the emergency use authorization, you can request these other statuses on top of that if you wanted to move things along quicker. But for any product, you can ask for there to be a breakthrough designation. So if you're going to have a product that substantially improves on the therapies that are currently available, FDA will review your application and see whether or not it qualifies as a breakthrough therapy. And if it does, then it would be given priority review. There's also an accelerated review approval process where if there's an unmet need in the marketplace, you can have your application approved on a surrogate endpoint. So that would quicken your timeline to market as well. And there's a actual fast track, in quotations, process. And you would have to show in that application that there's a serious and an unmet need in the marketplace. But yes, the general answer is yes, there are various ways that you can fast track the process, but you're going to have to meet some statutory requirements before you can do that. So it's not something that you can just go, I really want this to get to market faster.
Stephanie, I'll add that there is a coronavirus treatment acceleration program through CDER and CBER. Those are the drug and biologics side. We've helped several clients in that space. So what the FDA is asking is that if you currently have a product under investigation, maybe you have an IND or an IDE for an investigational device or drug that you think could also be of therapeutic benefit during the pandemic, that you separately request that your product be reviewed under the CTAP program. And currently, I'm looking at the FDA's website. They've evaluated over 560 coronavirus treatment products. These are new products, new in the last year, as well as products that have been undergoing development for other indications that were then pivoted to coronavirus.
Heather, a question for you. Have you seen or are you aware of regulatory challenges regarding face mask production?
Oh my goodness, I could speak all day long about face masks. So let's talk about face masks. There's face coverings, which are the cloth coverings that you can buy on Instagram and Amazon that make no health claims, right? Those are not medical devices. So the cloth, the fabric face masks with, you know, the funny little features on them, those are great. I encourage everybody to wear a face covering, double layer. When you make a claim, though, if you are claiming that your face mask provides a liquid barrier, prevents the penetration of particles such as bacteria and viruses, that is a medical indication and deems your product as a medical device for which you must have marketing approval before you can market your device. Now, due to the shortage that we saw during Ebola, the agency acted quickly to pass what we call an umbrella emergency use authorization for face masks. So Sarah and I in particular, I think I've lost count, Sarah, is it maybe 4, 5, 6 clients that we have been working with who have pivoted. A number of textile manufacturers are making face masks that meet the fluid barrier claim for a surgical face mask or are antibacterial resistant. You're allowed to market those under an enforcement policy that the agency has put out without a marketing application, and you can make the claims set out within the enforcement policy. So this is a very unique opportunity for manufacturers to continue to employ their staff, provide a much needed resource to frontline workers, and generate revenue that they could then post-pandemic use to apply for a marketing application later on. So these products, these face masks that are making claims that they provide a liquid barrier, could be used as surgical masks, can stay on the market during the emergency use authorization. Once it's revoked, as Sarah mentioned, our understanding of manufacturers will be protected. However, they will be required to submit a marketing application to the agency, which we can certainly help with. Requires doing some testing of your products and providing that testing information to the agency. So we've been doing that. We have 3 clients who had no intention of entering medical devices a year ago and are now fully fledged medical device manufacturers of PPE, that's personal protective equipment, of gowns, masks, gloves. And we do have some clients who are importing products. So the agency has a list of approved products. You may have heard of the KN95. The KN95 masks are made in China. You just need to be sure that you're importing masks that are on the approved list at FDA's website. And again, we can help you with that. So I hope I answered your question, but please wear a face mask and understand that a lot of the face masks that are being used are may not be approved, but they're allowed under the enforcement policy.
Thank you, Heather. Dan, I want to move back to you. At SC Bio and in South Carolina, we work a lot with our early stage companies, and we're always looking for ways to support those early stage companies. Does the FDA offer any special programs to assist that particular area, those early stage companies?
Yeah, no, it does, and they're actually dramatically underutilized. Every year, FDA has to report to Congress as to how many small businesses it helps, and it's embarrassing to the agency. It's usually fewer than 20, just because people don't know those programs are available. So each of the centers, whether it's the Center for Drug Evaluation Research for biologics or medical devices, has a dedicated small business staff that helps companies who have either fewer than 500 employees or less than $500 million a year in annual revenue. So it's a very generous standard for what constitutes a small business. And that dedicated staff will answer your questions. They're there as a resource to help you navigate the agency, to help you know where to go next, what your next step is in getting your product approved. So I would really encourage everybody out there who has an early stage company for an FDA regulated product, go ahead and register as a small business with the FDA. It's a very short form, and the benefits can really be quite substantial.
Thank you. So register. What are some common mistakes that you've seen some of those early stage companies make when they are seeking FDA approval?
I think the biggest one is not going to the agency soon enough. So, depending on what type of product you have, the FDA wants to talk to you basically as soon as you think you have a product. Heather and I have both, but particularly Heather has worked helping a lot of companies get their initial meeting with the FDA and go in and get some very good advice. Because it doesn't cost anything. And if you go in and you ask them, you talk to them, they're going to tell you exactly what it is that they want from you in order to move to the next step in the process. And that's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money, and prevent you from going down some dead ends. So I would really encourage, as soon as you think you have a product that's worth talking about and a little bit of data, start thinking about asking for a meeting with the FDA to go in and see what the next steps are going to be.
Super, thank you. And Sarah, a question for you, still sticking with those early stage companies. Do you have advice or things that those early stage companies can do to potentially avoid product liability litigation?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit when I was talking earlier, but I think it's prudent to involve an attorney on the front end to look at your liability risk. So this isn't just your insurance, although that is something that an attorney can look at for you. Frequently, product liability insurance is not going to cover all of the claims that you could potentially be facing. So you want to make sure that you're as covered as you think you are, first of all. And if you're not covered, what are the things that you can do to reduce your risk if you do get sued? And, some of those things which I've put on for clients in the past would include training programs for your sales representatives or for your quality people that are talking to customers, because you're going to have some way for patients to report adverse events to your company. So what's your process going to be for how you handle those adverse events? Who are the people that you have working for you? Do they have the requisite experience? And are you making sure that the script that you give them essentially is as compliant as it needs to be with FDA, in addition to limiting your liability risk? So a lot of the things on the form that they ask for example, if you're reporting an adverse event, relate to defects in the product. Well, you don't want your customer rep who is taking that call with your patients to be writing that the product has a defect all over written materials, which can then be produced in discovery if you are sued. And yes, we all know that a product defect in this sense of the word is how FDA defines it, but the courts don't understand the difference between the defects that you're talking about and a malfunction and an error and a user error. So they don't understand the nuances of that. So it's really helpful if you have someone that does have experience in product liability review a lot of your processes that are in place and make sure that those are going to be minimizing the risk to your company on the front end. Other things I would suggest doing are the risk assessment per product. So really looking at each product, and it's not a lengthy process, so we can get that done for you quickly, or a different law firm, if you wanted to use them, can get it done for you quickly, within a week or so, I would say. But it takes looking at, all of the case law, all of the plaintiff's advertising, kind of make sure that you're working with someone that really knows the life sciences industry well, because there's a lot of analogous situations that you can predict if you're familiar with the types of devices and the types of drugs that you're working with. So it might be a new drug that's on the market, but if it falls into like the biologic bucket, we do have a history of kind of what plaintiffs' counsel, what courts have done with biologics, and those types of things are good for you to be aware of on the front end so that you can mitigate your risk and do something that will hopefully avoid that litigation that's so expensive, as opposed to, dealing with it once you get sued.
Thank you, Sarah. Heather, Dr. Hatcher, I'm going to circle back to you and revisit COVID. I know we just canceled our annual holiday trip that we had booked a year ago, and realized yesterday we had not yet canceled, so I just canceled that and broke the news to my children this morning, though they weren't surprised. Everybody's waiting for the vaccine. I think we're getting very, very close. There's, promising news articles every day. But can you speak to the long-term safety of the COVID vaccine?
I wish I could wave a magic wand and say, you had it all along, it's going to be fine. I can say that the vaccines that are probably going to come out first, Moderna and Pfizer, are mRNA based vaccines. There have never been on the market in the US mRNA-based vaccines. So there's concern, obviously, for the first time for anything. However, these are not the science behind mRNA vaccines is older than COVID. So there have been ongoing studies, preclinical studies with mRNA vaccines for years, for many, many years. The Operation Warp Speed put resources into these product development that have been sorely needed for years. So to alleviate concern that, oh my goodness, they just whipped these vaccines together in a year, I want to dispel that myth. That is not, yes, they were able to advance quickly in a year, but the basic science behind the technology has been studied for years. That said, these are not without risk, of course. We don't know how long the immunity will last in individuals, because the disease itself has only been around for less than a year. But it looks like I'm seeing what everybody else is seeing. We haven't seen the data. The agency is reviewing now Pfizer and Moderna's data, safety data, but they do look very promising. There are others in the works. So all of the vaccines that are coming out are slightly different. Some of them are more old school, based on proteins, and some are the mRNA where your body acts to make the protein. As with any vaccine, they're saying that individuals are going to experience mild fever and achiness, and this is your body's attempt to. This happens anytime that your body is is fighting off an infection. So it's not that the shot made you sick, it's your body's reaction to the normal course of building immunity to not be frightened. So these emergency use authorization vaccines, well, as Dan mentioned, they are not going to have the robust data that traditional vaccines have before they hit the market. They will be required to provide very tightly controlled reporting of any adverse events. I think the biggest concern now with the vaccines is who's going to get it first, and maintaining the chain of cold storage for some of these. Most of them require at least -20. My husband is a director of a hospital pharmacy, and they had to order 2 new freezers just to hold the vaccine. So the infrastructure within hospital systems and drugstores is going to need to be supported by, cold chain. And then some of these vaccines require super cold temperatures. And so what we're understanding is that where you live geographically may impact the type of vaccine that you get. But to your point about safety, that is the agency's main goal, is to make sure that the information that these companies provide to them is safe. And that's why the agency is currently reviewing these 2 products that could roll out as soon as middle of the month.
Thank you, Heather. I know.
Stephanie, if I could just
Sure,
add to that
please,
for a second.
go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to point out that the Moderna vaccine, and I imagine the Pfizer vaccine too, but the Moderna vaccine is the one that I've read. That's been tested in 30,000 patients. That is a phenomenal amount of data. I mean, that, I can say I will be the first in line when these vaccines are available. So, I mean, I think that we can have a lot of confidence in the data that's being submitted and when the FDA tells us that they're safe.
Dan, just to follow up, that one has been tested in 30,000 patients. Is that kind of in line with what you typically see for a vaccine? Is that or is that more, or is that less? Like, how does that compare with what a process that test population would normally look like?
That's a lot more than a vaccine would usually be tested in. So, I mean, I think because of the profile, the current public health impact from the pandemic and the potential public health impact from if there are adverse events associated with vaccine, both the manufacturers and the FDA are being extra careful with this. So, whereas other emergency use authorization products are being approved on fairly small phase 3 samples, the vaccines are an exception. And I do think the agency appears to be asking for, or at least the manufacturers are voluntarily supplying a lot more data than would normally be expected.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I know it can't come fast enough. We're all waiting on it. The amount of loved ones and friends that have been lost is just heartbreaking and unbelievable. The sooner we can get control of this, the better. Sarah, I have a question for you. We're moving into a new administration right now. How do you think the leadership under the new administration is going to impact life sciences companies?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, so it's always hard to predict. But I can look at some of the policies that were in place during the Trump administration and compare them to what I think the policies are going to be in the Biden administration. And just sort of looking at 3 big issues: drug pricing, trust, and immigration. I would say that on drug pricing, the Biden administration overall will be more challenging for life sciences companies. He has said he's going to take a stricter stance towards the pricing issues that have been going on. Trump, though, was pushing drug pricing reform as well. So I think although Biden's going to be a little bit worse for that, it's going to be fairly similar in how it shakes out. For trust in science and government agencies overall, I think the Biden administration will be a huge improvement over what we saw in the Trump administration for life sciences companies. There was definitely an erosion during the Trump administration of trust towards all public agencies. And, you know, I think that the FDA, from my perspective, did a good job on showing that they were an independent and science-based agency and not one that was going to be controlled by politics. But I know that there was some erosion in public trust during the Trump administration, which I'm hoping will be made a little bit better during the Biden administration. I mean, TBD, we'll have to see how that goes, but that would be my thought on that. And then in terms of immigration, I think we all know that the Trump administration was fairly locked down on immigration issues. Biden should be opening some of that back up a little bit, which for life sciences companies can be huge because, as we all know, it's really a global marketplace out there, and you're competing for the top talent across the world. And so being able to get more diverse talent into your companies will be helpful. So the Biden administration, I think if you're looking, you know, kind of on balance at various policies, I think that you're probably going to be seeing a net positive from the new administration, but we will see. There's always, you know, legislative and regulatory changes that come with any administration, and I think we have yet to see sort of what the priorities will be once Biden gets into office.
You said, and you raise an excellent point. I know when I'm working with companies that are moving into South Carolina, you know, we obviously have a lot of wonderful international companies that call South Carolina home. So immigration issues come up routinely. But I will say that for those life sciences companies, it's particularly important. It's one of the forefront issues when we're talking with a life sciences industry that's looking to move into the state or grow, because it is truly a global marketplace and they're looking at that talent worldwide. So that's an excellent point. Those are all the questions that I have gathered and thought of today. Heather and Dan, Sarah, Sam, do you have any last thoughts or anything that you would like to share with the group before we wrap up today?
Well, I'll just chime in and say it's a pleasure working with the SC Bio community. Know your product, educate your team on your product, and when you're ready to go to the agency, if you need some hand-holding, we're here for you.
Y'all definitely are, and I'll just chime in. I want to thank each of you for your participation today. The expertise is fantastic, and we all benefit from it. And again, I'm grateful this will be archived because I know we have others who wanted to join today that couldn't, that will enjoy following up later. You know, on an encouraging note, I want to say this. Right now, you know, the silver linings of this pandemic are recognition in many cases of a global supply chain problem for the U.S. and the fact that over 90% of antibiotics, vitamin C, most of the API that goes into every drug that we consume is made offshore, and in China, particularly India. And there's a lot of wind in the sails to onshore and to increase pharmaceutical and life science industry opportunities on American soil. We're working with a lot of federal agencies right now, our congressional delegation, BARDA, HHS, the Department of Defense, and between that, opportunity zone legislation that's been introduced by Senator Tim Scott, there are probably unprecedented opportunities for the growth of the life science industry in states like South Carolina like never before. So having access to the expertise y'all were sharing today, because clearly the FDA navigation process is essential to successful strategies on that, EUAs, and you name it. And then Stephanie, your economic development expertise coupled with Alyssa's healthcare expertise, these are all things that we're going to be taking advantage of as we try to mount a very aggressive and effective strategy for bringing a lot of life science industry to South Carolina.
Thank you, Sam. thank you all to our guests for being with us today. And again, we will make this video available, this recording after. Thank you, Heather, Sarah, and Dan, for sharing the wonderful depth of knowledge and a little bit of glimpse into the inside of your practice and how you just do such a beautiful job supporting companies and navigating the FDA, the regulatory process. Sam, thank you again for your tremendous leadership and all that SC Bio does. It's just a great honor to serve along beside you and to have your energy in this state. So thank you all. It's a great pleasure for letting us be with you today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.